Hello and welcome to Walk the Talk, our version of a podcast where you walk if you want to while we do the talking. So we don't want to be adding to your virtual fatigue. So if you're up for it, plug in your earphones and listen while you take us on a walk. So use the next 45 minutes or so to move your body and feed your mind. My name is Sarah and I'm one of the co-founders and trainers at POINT3 Wellbeing, and I will be hosting today's Walk the Talk conversation, the next in our series aimed at HR professionals, business leaders and anyone interested in the mental health and well-being of people in the workplace. And I'm delighted today to be joined by our panelists, Victoria Kenny, special friend of POINT3 Wellbeing, and our very own Nicky Morgan, co-founder of POINT3, for today's Walk the Talk. So they are both going to be sharing their mental health stories, and in particular, the role that the workplace has had to play in supporting them. So I will shortly invite our panelists to introduce themselves, but welcome to you both and thanks so much for joining me. So let's dive right in with today's conversation. So to start, please could you both introduce yourselves and share as much as you feel comfortable sharing today when it comes to your own mental health journey. So coming to you first, Victoria, and welcome. Oh, you are on mute.
Hello, so I'm Victoria. I am a chartered accountant and I have worked with a variety of businesses. So I've worked for Deloitte, a big four, down to being a director at small companies and within charities. So I've had a real kind of wide experience of the working world. So my mental health journey began in junior school. And I suffered from low mood and anxiety from my early teens. It wasn't really widely recognized at the time, I don't think. So I definitely felt like I appeared different to people around me, especially at that age when you're really aware of kind of social differences. So yeah, my mood disorder continued throughout my teens. I was diagnosed by a GP, but I wasn't given any treatment or any suggestions. It was more of a fact than something that I could help myself with. So in my later teens, just before my 18th, I developed anorexia nervosa, and that again went undiagnosed it went diagnosed but untreated for about 9 months, and then around November of 2013, I went to London and met a doctor and an amazing medical team that sort of taught me about mental health and got me on the straight and narrow through a variety of hospital admissions and day treatment and medication. So, and that was really like the first time I took ownership of my mental health. And didn't feel kind of strange for being that way. So during that treatment, I worked at Jack Wills. So I worked in retail. And although I didn't feel very understood, because I think back then, even though it's only 10 years ago, mental health was less understood than it is today. I definitely still felt supported. The company were very good at letting me have breaks when I needed breaks, choose my days off to go to London to see my care team. So, that was my kind of first experience of workplace dealing with it. And it was really positive. So after about 12 months after my recovery, I started as an audit associate at Deloitte. And 6 months into my training contract, I really started to struggle with my mood and disordered eating. So I spoke to my manager, who I'd built a really good relationship with, but hadn't approached mental health with her or had anyone speak to me about mental health before. And she actually mentioned that the company had mental health champions. So they were sort of, I think there was about 12 of them across the UK. And it was their role to be supportive. So I got in contact with one of them, and they were awesome. It was really nice to speak to someone, and I really liked they weren't in my office. It was someone from Birmingham. So I didn't feel like I was constantly being reminded of having those conversations, which for me, it did really help. And then things didn't get much better. So 6 weeks, another 6 months passed, and they put me in contact with occupational health within the company, and they signed me off for 8 weeks. To be honest, I was really nervous getting signed off. I wasn't sure I would have a job to come back to, but I did, and they gave me a phased return to work while I adjusted to new medication, while I adjusted to working again. And that was kind of that's what's brought me to where I am. I've been out of the corporate world for 3 years. My mental health still is a challenge, but I'd say I live with my diagnosis, and I think it makes my life not more exciting, but it makes it more worth it, because the challenges are challenges, and when you overcome them, they're amazing. So yeah, that's where I am now.
Well, thank you so much for being so generous and open with sharing that. And there's lots in there that I'd like to come back to through the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Turning to you, Nicky, would love to hear a little bit from you. So if you could introduce yourself and again, share a bit, as much as you feel comfortable sharing today, about your mental health journey.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. And thanks to Victoria as well. You really are inspiring, Victoria, and you're giving me the confidence to be able to have this conversation as well today, because it's not always an easy conversation to have. Like all of us, my mental health journey started as a child. That's where all of our mental health journeys begin. There was mental ill health on both my mum and dad's side of the family. So to one extent or another, I think I was always sort of aware of sort of mental health challenges. Certainly as a child, I was seen as a sensitive child, whatever that means, and you know, with hindsight, displayed definitely anxious traits from quite a young age, but sort of nothing that warranted a diagnosis at that point in time. I did gain a diagnosis of anxiety, but not until my early 30s. That was after a significantly challenging life event. Early 30s, I really was sort of in the thick of my career. I worked in events and marketing, high pressured, high stress, but actually the workplace for me, more often than not, was a place that I thrived. So, you know, I guess more of that later. We'll be talking about the support from a workplace point of view. But up front, something to say for me was actually the workplace was a channel in a way for my mental health challenges along the way, and a place where I was able to thrive and perform in spite of the diagnosis that I'd received. For me, it really triggered an interest in our mind and human behavior and psychology when I gained that diagnosis. I was just super curious and I wanted to learn more. I didn't know then, but I do know now that bibliotherapy is a thing. That's part of recovery, is to learn and to read and to understand more about what's going on. So that's what I did. And I actually went and trained to become a clinical hypnotherapist after having sought treatment and support from a hypnotherapist myself. I was just so interested in what was going on and wanted to learn more. So that really was a huge part of my recovery, the learning and the training. And I took all of that back into the workplace. So my latter 5 years, I took on a head of people role with responsibility for everything, training and development, recruitment, anything people matters, and mental health and wellbeing was an element of that. And that clearly became a stepping stone to what we're doing now at POINT3 Wellbeing. So that's a little bit about my journey, and look forward to chatting more.
Thank you, Nikki. I mean, staying with you, because just picking up with what you've just said about, you know, what you've learned and the getting curious with what you experienced and the bibliotherapy. Can you expand a little bit more about what you have learned or you continue to learn as a result of your story, your experiences?
Yeah, I think continue to learn is the right phrase, because what I understand about mental health, it is complex, it's mysterious, it is an ongoing learning journey and experience. And, you know, I've turned it into my life's work really now. I don't think we're ever going to know everything. I think we're going to be continually learning. For me, that diagnosis that I had in sort of 10 years or so ago, it's important to say I'm not living with a diagnosis now, but I do see recovery as a kind of live and active and ongoing thing. Certainly the choices that I make and the lifestyle that I live, I am conscious of my mental health within that, and I do what I can along the way. Sometimes more often than not, sometimes better at sometimes than other, but I manage my life in a way to support my mental health as much as I can. But what I'm learning is it's complex, it's mysterious, it's unique. We all have our own experience of mental health, whatever that means to us. But the more that we can talk and open up and share, the more that we can learn. And I think there's great power in that as well.
Thank you. And coming to you, Victoria, and picking up with where you kind of finished, you know, what have you learned or continue to learn as a result of your journey?
I think for me, I would completely agree with everything Nikki said. It's such a journey and you continue to learn every day. I think for me, the biggest learning curve was actually looking at myself and saying, I am such a bubbly, confident, outward person. And I think that people would be quite surprised if they knew like the extent of my mental health conditions. And so I think it's really for me not to be judgmental on and assume from the surface level, because mental health comes in so many different forms and it isn't visible. And I think providing that platform of it's okay to be okay and it's okay to not be okay. And sometimes also for me to not always need to be bubbly.
So is that a sort of a self-judgment?
I think it's, but with other people, I think it's very easy to look at other people and say, oh, they have it easy, they're always happy, always bubbly, and actually you don't know what goes on behind closed doors. And I think it's being really compassionate and thinking about, you don't know what that person you meet in the office, on the tube, in the coffee shop is actually going through that day. So I think it's really being aware that everybody has mental health and we don't know what, it's not as visible as a broken leg. So we do need to consider it when we're engaging with people.
Yeah, and so it goes two ways. Yeah, love that. I mean, just sort of picking up on that kind of the invisible nature of mental health. Sadly, too many people are suffering in silence due to the stigma, whether that's self-stigma that we put on ourselves or the social stigma that's out there that surrounds the subject of mental health. We're shortly going to talk a little bit more on that, but we know how important it is to have a good support system in place, whether that's, you know, our own kind of coping strategies or the social sort of network that we have around us. And given that, you know, we spend the majority of our time in the workplace, in our workplace communities, you know, it is fundamental that those that are experiencing mental ill health, feel understood, and feel supported, and feel that it's okay to not be okay. So I'd love to hear from you both as to your personal experiences, and you both touched on how the workplace has supported you in the past. So coming to you first, Victoria, if you could expand a little bit more on some of the really positive experiences that you had in the workplace and how they supported you.
Yeah, so I think I touched on it quite a lot earlier, so I won't repeat. I'll try not to anyway. But for me, it was the workplace, once I asked for the help, was so supportive. Especially for a big corporation, I think people were quite surprised when I said I was getting such support from Deloitte. I think these big corporations, churn and burn is sort of what people perceive, and actually they really care about their people, and they provided suggested counsellors, but fortunately I had my own counsellor, so I didn't take them up on that, but they were so flexible. I worked from home when I was, even after I'd come back to work from my little 8-week break, I was allowed to work from home when I had therapy. They were really understanding if I was having a bad day. And a thing for me was actually that I found it very difficult to be away from home. For me at the time, staying in hotels, not having to go out to eat every night and things like that were a huge trigger of stress, especially having disordered eating. So for me, they were brilliant. And actually the partner in the office made it very plain and simple to all managers that I wasn't to be put on away jobs, which would mean I would be in a hotel for a week. And that made a massive difference, because I always had that grounding when I got home. But I think they were just open to the conversation. I think they didn't have any suggestions at the time, so that was difficult, but they were so open to my suggestions. And I think it made it obvious to other people that younger than me that is that help, because I spoke very openly about the help I received.
And coming to you, thank you, Victoria, thank you. Coming to you, Nicky, and you talked about how the workplace, was a place of where you felt really supported as well, but you kind of wanted to be at work because it was a positive way to not distract, but to keep you kind of feeling purposeful, I guess. Can you expand a little bit more on the positive experience that you received in the workplace and how it supported you?
Yeah, and I think it's important to say, first of all, that I actually didn't ever disclose my diagnosis. And in hindsight, that was the self-stigma that I put upon it. I am really, really confident if I had that the support I would have received would have been incredible. But I didn't disclose that diagnosis. That was my own self-stigma. But that said, mental health is shown by the way that we think, that we feel, and how we behave. And sometimes my behavior in the workplace, in terms of the emotions that I was displaying, the heightened emotions, clearly indicated to people around me that I wasn't so okay. And just a couple of examples, really. One of my managers, and this was actually when I first entered the workplace, so in my early 20s, and I got upset and I cried, emotionally snapped, something was going on, can't remember what. I was mortified that I'd sort of had this moment of emotional snapping and crying. But that manager at that time, he said to me, never apologize for having emotions. It shows that you care. And he made me feel so safe in that moment, and so supportive. It makes me feel emotional now thinking about it, because that really then, from an early point in my career, made me feel okay if I did have moments of heightened emotions. And that's been, a lesson and a learning that I've been able to share with other people who've in turn sort of worked into teams of mine. At the point of diagnosis, which I didn't disclose that there was a significant life event that was going on. It was really challenging. I opted to take holiday. I said to my line manager, I need to take just a week off straight away. Took that holiday. But during that time, the CEO of the organization, who I was also working closely with on a project, he got in touch and he said, look, I know that stuff's going on. If you want it, take a week on us, take an extra week on us. He said, you've worked so hard for this organization, and this is just something that we can give back to you. It was, to me, just such a beautiful way of saying, I see you, we support you, but sort of empowering me one way or the other. It wasn't an order, take this time off. It was a gift if I wanted it to take, which I did do. So just a couple of really sort of nice examples of how I really felt supported. And, you know, more than anything, the organization that I worked for, TRO, I'll name it, I was there for 15 years. It really, to me, became a work family. I feel so lucky to have experienced that. And it really was a place of belonging for me. And at points, that was my main source of connection and belonging. And I think this is so important in the workplace. You just don't know what is going on necessarily in people's lives outside of the workplace, but the workplace can become such a place of connection and belonging. And that in itself becomes an incredible support. And it was for me.
And you mentioned that word, you know, safety. I mean, ultimately, at its core, that's what we all want to feel safe. We all want to feel like we belong somewhere. And only then can we truly be ourselves and reach our full potential in the workplace, but also beyond. So really wonderful to hear both of your experiences and how they have been positive for you. I think often, you know, we can sort of default to thinking that when times are tough that we'll find that support outside of the workplace, family, friends, but you know, as you've demonstrated, it can just as easily come from within, which shows the opportunity and the power that we all have within the workplace, whatever our roles, whether we're a manager, whether we're a business leader, an HR, or just a colleague, in terms of supporting others. But sadly, this and what you've described, it isn't necessarily the experience for everyone, and a big part of that is, as we've discussed, this stigma, whether that's self or social. And how people, you know, do feel that they might be discriminated against if they talk openly about their mental health challenges in the workplace. And I'll quote a few statistics just to really demonstrate how real and damaging stigma is. So Time to Change research a couple of years ago showed that more than half of employees, more than 50% of employees, say they feel unable to talk openly with their line manager if they're suffering from stress. And we know that stress can be the precursor to mental ill health. We also, the statistics show that 35% of people think they would be less likely to get promoted if they had a diagnosis of depression. So stigma is real, and that's why, you know, it's important to have this conversation, and that's why we're really passionate at Point3 about what we do. So when it comes to breaking down some of this stigma, we know it's not going to happen overnight. We know it's going to take time and lots of conversations and lots of initiatives. But what are your kind of individual thoughts and ideas and on the simple things or the larger things that organisations and individuals can do to help with this? Coming to you first, Victoria, if I may.
Sure. Sorry, I've not got the hang of Skype. I'm an absolute technophobe. So I think for me, actually, because of my experience, I think it's not to educate the HR and the leaders, but it's for the leaders to educate everyone within the business, not just those suffering. Because I think for me, my biggest challenge was how I was perceived by my work colleagues. Every year at the Christmas Awards, I got the 9 to 5 award, which was mainly reserved for the person who sort of they thought skived off early. And I think, but for me, the reason I went home early was to protect my mental health and not to get myself overly tired. So I think there's a real learning curve for everybody within a business to be more mindful of their colleagues who potentially are suffering. I think, like I said, it's the visibility of it, and having that, being able to say not only to the managers and the leaders, actually, I need to do this for my mental health. It's being able to have those conversations with your colleagues. And I think that needs to come from the top. Like if everybody feels that they can talk about it openly, not just behind a closed door, then that can only make people be more open and feel more supported.
Yeah, thank you. Love that. Yeah, I mean, we often talk about, what we do is not just focused on those that are going through their own mental health struggles or journey. Actually, really importantly, it's raising awareness for the 3 in 4 who aren't experiencing mental health at the moment. You never know what's going to happen in the future, but it's raising their awareness so that everyone is supporting each other and everyone can thrive as a team and together. Nicky, anything to add from your side and from your experience? Of course, you've got your own lived experience, but also through the work that we do at Point 3.
Yeah, sort of picking up on Victoria's comment there about leadership. Absolute, ideal benchmark stuff is when the leadership team are on board and understand how important it is to create psychological safety amongst a workplace. So I absolutely echo what Victoria says there, but I actually think it can come from anywhere in terms of creating a movement around destigmatizing, and we've seen in the work that we do at Point 3 some incredible work going on, from a leadership level, but also a groundswell from mental health ambassadors within the workplace. I think that's a really key part, is just to keep people talking openly about the conversation, normalizing the subject of mental health. I think upskilling of managers is super important, because often it's going to be managers with people reporting into them who are going to be on the ground faced with potential sort of points of crisis or mental ill health. So equipping managers, I think, is really, really important as well. But really just having the conversations and creating openness and honesty. Psychological safety is sort of the foundation. That's not something you can just buy. It's not something that you can plug in. It's something that is created through all the little moments of trust and belonging and connection and communication that are built up over time. So there isn't a magic formula for that, but with the right intentions and the right communication and the openness and the vulnerability, psychological safety really can be built, and is a game changer to supporting people who might be experiencing mental health, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. So we do all have a role to play, whether we're a leader or a manager or a colleague, to help normalize that conversation, as you've said, within our circles of influence. And of course, this goes beyond the workplace as well. And, it is reassuring, hopefully, to people listening, that we don't have to be mental health experts to support others. As we've heard, it is just about being kind and compassionate and listening and non-judgmental. These are really fundamental ways to support those around us. So we've talked about how we can support others and each other, but part of looking after ourselves is being self-aware and having good coping strategies in place to help support our mental health day to day. I'd love to hear from you both as to what your, as we call them at Point 3, your wellbeing non-negotiables are. If you are able to share perhaps 3 of your wellbeing non-negotiables, those things that you do daily or weekly to support your mental health. Victoria, if you could go first, please.
Yeah, so me and my partner actually talk about these a lot. We share them and they do change, which is really good. I've got my number 1 next to me, so I'm going to get it. You might wiggle and get nervous. This is the wellness bear. For those listening, he's my 3.5-year-old cockapoo, and spending sort of half an hour on the sofa with him and his dad every evening is one of my absolute, I will not lose it for the world. For me as well, it's definitely exercise for me. I'm a big runner, but if I'm not feeling running, I do try and do some sort of movement while being kissed. Sorry.
Love it.
And my third, I do enjoy, for me, it's very much top and tailing my day. So one of mine is evening snuggles with Thatcher and his dad. And then the other one for me is morning, having a coffee first thing when I wake up in bed, sort of quiet time to make sure I'm set up for the day and sort of wait for my internal clock to tell me where we're going to be that day, and kind of give it time to sort of settle and realize and be okay with what we've woken up in.
I love that. So you're giving time to just sort of tune into yourself and how you're feeling, the weather, if you like, that day. Oh, thanks, Victoria. Nikki, let's hear from you.
Oh, it's lovely seeing the wellness bear, first of all. Such a cutie. So mine at the moment, and we do this exercise all the time, don't we, Sarah? So we get to sort of check in with our wellbeing non-negotiables, and they do change actually depending on what is going on. But my one absolute constant, same as Victoria, is exercise, movement outside. So that could be a walk, it could be a jog, but that's something that I pretty much need to do as standard every day. Another one for me at the moment, particularly when I've sort of got workshops or trainings or talks like this that sort of increase my anxiety levels. In the morning, I make myself a really nice cup of coffee and I watch whatever sitcom I'm watching at the moment, like a 20-minute episode. It feels really indulgent, but it sort of lightens the day that I have ahead. So that's something that I'm just dipping into at the moment. And then the other one, I'm very lucky and privileged to have lots of little people in my life, and I just love playing with them. So just once a week, playing a game, doing a jigsaw. Like, I learn so much from looking at the little people in my life. They are some of the greatest teachers, and just getting stuck into a bit of a play is a brilliant one.
Thank you, love it. So we have had a couple of questions come in, so I'm going to dive into those before we wrap up today's conversation. So the first is to you, Nikki. How did you know that work was a helpful channel rather than a distraction from your mental health?
It's a very brilliant question, so thank you to whoever brought that one in. And again, I'm going to say again, everybody's mental health journey is unique to them. So there is a strong element of learning about yourself and self-awareness. And I can certainly say that at points I probably overworked, which was a bit of an unhelpful coping strategy for me. But more often than not, I knew it was a helpful channel. Again, going back to mental health, or the quality of your mental health being shown in your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior. For me, the workplace and the work that I was doing was always, or pretty much more often than not, something that I felt positively about. I was performing well. I felt motivated to do a good job and had sort of positive outcomes. So for me, that was an indication that I was having a healthy relationship more often than not with the work that I was doing. And sort of channeling a lot of stuff going on outside, taking that energy and channeling into something that felt productive and positive for me. But I will caveat that with there certainly were points where I did overwork, and potentially that was more of an unhelpful coping mechanism. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. And the next one is for either of you, both of you. How can you differentiate between genuine allies and those that are looking for a bit of gossip? So whoever has shared this has said they're currently going through a traumatic experience and finding it difficult to set boundaries with people because I am normally agreeable and a people pleaser. An interesting question there.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in at the beginning and just I think this is a really difficult question to answer. Firstly, I'm sorry to hear you're going through a traumatic experience. It's incredibly difficult to set boundaries, especially when you're under stress and in sort of high alert mode. I think often it's the people at a time of a traumatic experience, often it's the people who you know have also been through a traumatic experience themselves, often can be add a massive amount of value because they understand where you've been. They'll understand the sort of the desire for it not to be gossip. I think, unfortunately, often I've had it, and I think I'm sure Nicky, Sarah, you guys have as well, that you find out often too late that it's your trauma has become gossip. But I think trust yourself, be cautious with who you let into your circle. I'm a massive people pleaser. I let many people see me, but I'm not truly known by many. And I think there's a really nice, just choose who you let into that inner circle. It doesn't mean you have to be distant or rude or anything like that. It's just really let those people who you are sure about see you, and try it out and be brave. And you are going to be disappointed at times. There are going to be people who let you down because not everybody is maybe going to respond the way you want them to. But I would just say be brave and protect yourself at the same time.
Yeah, that's lovely. I think that is it. Well, for both of those questions, actually, it is about sort of tuning into yourself. It's that self-awareness and going, does this feel right? It might, to trust your intuition, and more often than not, actually, our gut does know the answer. Anything to add, Nicky?
I think Victoria answered that beautifully. The only thing I would add, and I'm totally with you, Sarah, on trusting our instincts, but I also acknowledge that at points of challenge, we might not have such instant access to those. So when we're experiencing sort of crisis points or challenging points, it can sort of really interfere with our own self-trust in a way. What I would say in terms of people to reach out to, if you are lucky enough to have mental health first aiders or a similar sort of support network, then it's part of the job of a mental health first aider to be sort of confidential and hold safe confidential conversations. So that might be a route worth trying as well. But my very, very best wishes to that individual, and thanks for the question as well.
Yes, thank you, and I hope we've answered all of your questions. So as we sort of come to the end and wrap up the webinar, are there any final thoughts, Nicky, Victoria, for HR leaders, business leaders, colleagues, in terms of how we can support people in the workplace to ensure they feel safe to be themselves if they have a diagnosis of mental ill health or not. This is about ultimately we want to be our best selves. We want to think, feel, behave, to our optimum. What can we do to support ourselves and each other?
Shall I go?
Oh, Nikki, yeah, sorry.
I would just love for the conversations to keep happening, to not be scared of the conversation, to open it up, and to role model behavior as well. That's something, looking back, that I really wish that I'd done more of, is be a little bit more open about what was going on for me, whilst I'm sure people had guesses as to what might be going on. Just to own it, and to openly talk about it, and in turn give people around me the permission to share what was going on for them as well. So yeah, role model, keep learning about this stuff as well. It's a never-ending journey. Be curious, be kind, and just keep the conversations going. That's what I'd say.
Love it. Anything to add, Victoria?
Oh, Nikki stole mine right at the end. Learning. I think keep learning. And also a big one is, when HR are involved, or having a conversation, if you are an individual who's having a conversation with somebody who is having mental ill health, or worried about somebody who is, in hindsight, you can ask for feedback. You can say, what worked for you? What could I have done to better support you in the future? And use real life experience to inform how you go forward and how you deal with it next time around. Love
that. Yes. Thank you both for your candor today. I've learned a lot. It's always wonderful chatting to you both and learning more and hearing more about others' experiences. It's incredibly generous of you to be so open and to be so vulnerable. As always, really, we are only touching the surface with this conversation, but it's an important place to start, to be having this conversation. So I encourage you all to continue having the conversation. Awareness is the starting point, but we also want onward positive action as a result, and after. So I certainly hope to continue to have this conversation within my circles, outside of point 3, as much as possible. So thank you all. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Nikki, and thank you all for tuning in and listening.
Thank you. Can we have a wave from the wellness bear?
He's a bit of a dozy.
Thank you to our star guest, the wellness bear.
Oh, there he is. There's a shot of oxytocin right there.
I'm gonna scream.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye.